"Hands behind your head," the shouted command rang out in the packed job fair hall. Someone cried out in panic, "Has anyone called the police yet?" Every eye locked onto a middle-aged man standing motionless, both hands faintly trembling. When he pulled out his job application file, his sleeve rolled up, exposing a tattoo of an arrow and the words Kandahar 2010. That single small detail shifted the entire atmosphere. None of them knew that tattoo had once been a lifeline signal in a covert mission where he led 20 people out of a Taliban encirclement. And exactly 1 hour later, a former Navy SEAL walked in, carrying the truth that left the whole fair hall stunned into silence. The San Antonio City Arena was packed that day, not for a ball game or a concert, but for a job fair reserved for veterans and local labor, people who had once stood on the front line, now seeking a chance to stand within ordinary life. Amid the crowd vivid with shirts, ties, and recruiting banners, Mark Delgado walked in without making any sound. The old military jacket had faded, the sleeve edges slightly frayed. The thick-soled combat boots still held a layer of dust. No one was sure if it came from San Antonio's streets or somewhere far beyond. He walked straight, neither hurried nor hesitant, as though each step had been calculated beforehand. Mark was 42, solid and tall, yet in a room full of appraising eyes and promising salary boards, that frame drew no notice. Something quiet surrounded him, like a nameless wisp of smoke, cold and muted. His gaze did not seek recognition, only a place to be treated as a human being. On Mark's left wrist, just below the sleeve he had lifted to hand over his paperwork, was a tattoo, a simple arrow, broken midway, with a small line of text. Kandahar 2010. No ornament, no display, no artistic meaning, but it made people either let their eyes linger or look away. A recruiter at a tech booth, hair glossy, voice even like an advertisement, caught sight of the tattoo. He looked at Mark for a moment, then curled his lips slightly, eyes both contemptuous and indifferent. No inquiry, no courteous glance. Mark only inclined his head, a slight nod. He did not explain. He knew the tattoo was not for the world to understand. It was only for those who had been there. Kandahar, 2010, on a moonless night when every comm system was cut and all that remained were a pair of feet and a rusted compass. But here in the air-conditioned hall, every emblem of the past turned into something meaningless. He left that booth like a water shadow sliding across glass, leaving no trace. He was not angry. He only felt a familiar hollow opening in his chest, the place that had once been comrades, now silence. Each step Mark took was another time someone's gaze skimmed off him. It was as if that jacket were a kind of shell that made people not want to face what was inside. He did not have a digital tech degree, did not have a polished LinkedIn profile. Only a thick packet of records, timelines blurred out in the system, and a hand that had once held the lives of teammates like a fragile thread stretched through hell. When Mark stopped before another booth, a younger veteran was being welcomed enthusiastically. The man recounted his service time, weaving technology terms with military slang fluently. The recruiter laughed loudly, clapping him on the shoulder. "Modern veteran, we like that." Mark stood beside him, holding his file, not cutting in. No one saw him. He turned down another corner, edging himself among empty benches. In his hand the file was slightly creased, pages folded carefully. He sat, adjusted his cuff to cover the tattoo. No one was going to ask anyway. No one knew, no one asked, but did anyone still remember? He was not angry at those who had turned away, did not blame the eyes that looked at his wrist and then averted. They could not understand that the arrow tattoo was not to impress, but to remember, to survive, to not forget the final night he led his teammates out of the encircled ravine in Kandahar. That mission had no official name, only the code phrase arrow point, transmitted through headsets at midnight, and then erased from the system after they returned. A joint operation between the Army and SEALs, sending a small element into the darkest southern sector. Radios cut, maps inaccurate, GPS signals flickering like the breath of a wounded man. No one could call for support. No one was waiting for them to come back. Mark was then the sergeant responsible for navigation, the last in the team still fully conscious when the ring tightened. He was not ordered to withdraw, nor given a clear directive.
Welcome to Veteran Best Stories, where the war ends, but the stories live on. From the foxholes to front porches, we honor the silent battles our veterans still fight. Subscribe and walk with us beyond the battlefield.
There was only the ragged breathing of a young soldier freshly hit in the flank, and the eyes of the commander waiting for him to decide. He chose the mountain route, the farthest, most perilous path, but the least likely to be tracked. With an old compass and memory of terrain once sketched roughly in a notebook, he led them, not by map, not by radio, only by hand signals, absolute silence. Someone asked him afterward why he tattooed a broken arrow. Mark did not answer, but inside he knew, because that night all of them broke in the middle. No one remained intact, but whoever was still alive had to keep moving forward. He carried the wounded soldier for over 7 miles. Sweat ran down into his boot heels, mingling with blood. No medic, no medication. Only desert wind and a cadence of steps like a drum pounding inside a ribcage. By the time they reached the edge of the base, dawn was near. He did not go in with them. He stood outside, watched the medics wheel the litters out, then turned his back and walked toward the military truck line. No one stopped him. No one took his name. A month later, the Arrowpoint operation file vanished from every system. Only a plain letter was sent to him. No further discussion advisable. Thank you for keeping silent. No insignia. No emblem. Just a single line, as if erasing everything that had just occurred. Since returning home, Mark has lived on odd jobs, unloading pallets at a supermarket warehouse, night guarding an empty parking lot, sometimes taking small repair work for the mechanic's shop near the gas station. He did not complain, but each time he went to the VA, each time he filled in combat experience and was asked to provide supporting evidence, he stayed quiet. Once a VA employee looked at the computer screen and then up at him. "We don't see any record of you having combat history. Maybe you're confusing yourself with someone else." Mark nodded, did not argue. He had grown too used to having himself disappear from every record, as though he had never existed. Every night, lying down in the small rented room on the edge of San Antonio, he saw the desert again. Not from trauma, but from emptiness. The people he saved had mostly left the service. Some started families, some went missing, but none had ever mentioned that mission again. Like an unspoken pact of silence needing no signatures. Mark did not seek recognition. He did not speak of any feat. The tattoo on his arm was not for anyone else to look at. It was only to remind himself that there was one time, in a night with no orders, no light, he chose to step toward survival. Even if afterward the whole world turned its back. Dear friends, I have a small favor to ask you. Please hit like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you love inspirational stories, and don't forget to leave a comment telling me, where are you watching from and what time is it where you are? I always find it wonderful to see the whole world gathering together just to share a meaningful moment. In the air-conditioned chill of the arena, amid the lines of people waiting their turn, Mark almost dissolved into the gray-white background of the space. Footsteps passing him did not slow. Eyes slid over him without ever stopping. To everyone, he was just another veteran, perhaps a bit older, a bit outdated, and clearly no longer a fit for job descriptions written in tech slang. But from the far end of the hall, a man stopped. He carried no dossier and stood in no line. He simply stood still, eyes fixed on one very specific point, Mark's left wrist. In that instant, within the quiet crowd, it was as if a thin wire tightened between two people who had not met again in 15 years. Ethan Cole did not have to think long. He recognized that tattoo the way a soldier recognizes the weapon that once preserved his life. A broken arrow. Kandahar 2010. There are things that need no explanation. They simply reanimate through memory. Ethan walked forward slowly, without noise, without display. He stopped in front of Mark, eyes never leaving the wrist exposed beneath a frayed cuff. When Mark looked up, their eyes met, and neither needed to speak. "Do you still remember the code name?" The question emerged softer than a whisper, like a silent command string. Mark did not answer immediately. Then, with a slow movement, he raised his left hand, fingers forming the old signal. 3 moving up front, 2 flanking. He brought up his right hand, rotating the wrist upside down, as if mimicking a compass spinning when rounds begin to hiss through the air. No one around them understood anything. But to Ethan, it was everything. It was the map that led him out of that lethal ravine years ago. It was the final signal he saw before the light flared up from the rescue helicopter. It was life delivered by a man with no name, no roster number, only a compass and shoulders that never gave ground. Ethan stayed silent for a few seconds. He leaned in, wrapped an arm around Mark's shoulders and held him tight. A hug without sound, yet carrying within it all the things never spoken. "I was the last one you got out of that ravine," Ethan whispered, not for Mark to hear, but as if to let himself believe he was standing before the man who had saved his life, not just once, but through all the intervening years by way of silence. Mark did not react. No nod, no shake. He simply stood as though it required no confirmation, as if a part of him had grown used to people forgetting. But today, someone remembered. The silver-haired man before him was now the director of one of America's largest strategic security firms, Sentinel Corps. But in this moment, he was not a CEO. He was just a veteran, someone whose torn body had once crawled across the desert, clinging to each footstep of the guide. A man who had never forgotten who led him out of the place where there was no hope. Amid hundreds of strangers in a job fair that seemed meaningless, the thing no one expected occurred. The truth stepped out of the darkness, quiet and resolute like the very man who carried it. And then Ethan gripped Mark's hand once more, his eyes shining with something more than gratitude, recognition. The one thing, through all the years, no one had ever fully given Mark. Ethan did not leave after the embrace. He stood still for a moment, then turned his head and looked around the hall. In that instant, he no longer seemed a busy executive, but a man who had just recovered a fragment of memory he had thought buried forever. He walked to the organizer's table. No fuss, no elaborate request. He simply said one brief sentence, almost a command. "Give me a microphone." Sound from the speakers crackled softly. A few people turned their heads. No one knew who the silver-haired man was, but his deep, clear, decisive voice made the crowd pause. "Has anyone here ever fought in Kandahar, Afghanistan, in 2010? At first the space still murmured. Then one man halted mid-step. He looked up as if unsure he had heard correctly. Another, standing near the logistics booth, slowly folded his file. The two looked at each other, unplanned. Then both began walking toward the center of the hall. Then a third, a fourth. Within a few minutes, 6 men, hair graying, shoulders still straight, quietly left their seats and moved toward where Ethan was standing. No one spoke, but their eyes were all fixed on a single person, Mark. Ethan turned, pointed at the man still standing motionless beside an empty display table. "This man," he said, "is the reason we are still breathing." No further description was needed. All 6 of the others knew whom he was speaking about and why. One of them, a tall man in a Marine Corps jacket, came to full height, boot heels touching the floor lightly, right hand rising to his brow. A textbook salute, solemn, unornamented. It carried no rank and no ceremony, only recognition. And like a silent wave, the entire space seemed to freeze. Conversation stopped completely. People looked toward them, then toward Mark, the man who not long before had been ignored simply because of a tattoo. Now he was the center of a profound silence. Ethan turned back, handed Mark an envelope. No emblem of authority printed on it, just plain paper, but his voice was no longer a suggestion. "We don't need a list of achievements," he said. "We need someone who knows the way in the dark. At Sentinel Corps, you'll be Director of Strategic Training." Mark did not open the envelope. He held it as if holding something unfamiliar. All these years he had never thought about a title, never wanted to be given a role. But what he held was not merely an offer. It was the first time his silence had been heard by someone. Around them no one applauded. There were no cheers, but the eyes of those who had been in Kandahar grew still, as though at last a once-broken arrow had found its bearing. A young woman stepped forward, phone still recording in her hand. She said nothing, simply swept the lens from Mark to Ethan, then back to the group of veterans standing at attention. In her eyes was something like gratitude, not for what was happening, but for what had once been forgotten. Dear audience, take a short break or grab a glass of water, then keep listening. The developments ahead are even more surprising. Comment the number 1 if you think the story is good, so we know you are still here. It did not take long for the video from the job fair to spread. The image of the silver-haired man embracing a veteran in a worn jacket, and the decisive voice ringing through the hall. "He's the reason we're still breathing." Those who had been present that day recorded it on their phones, posting it online with the hashtag number Mark the Arrow. Within 48 hours, hundreds of thousands of shares, then millions of views. But Ethan Cole did not stop at social media. He was not the kind of man who believed in luck or a momentary crowd. He had once been saved by a decision not in an operations plan, a broken arrow in misread terrain, and he understood that if he did not do his part properly, that memory would remain forever only a quiet echo in the hearts of a few survivors. Ethan prepared a sworn statement of the event, no florid language, no circumlocution, describing the entire Kandahar 2010 mission from the ambush to the final second, when the helicopter touched down. He sent it to the Department of Defense, along with a list of 7 soldiers affirming they had participated in the operation, all signing under oath. Among those receiving the materials at the Pentagon was a young female officer named Elise Harmon, an analyst responsible for reviewing old files. When she read the final line of description, led across the desert by a sergeant using hand signals, no equipment, her heart caught. Her father, Captain Harmon, had once told of that night, of an unnamed soldier who carried him more than 7 miles without stopping even though blood soaked the shirt. When they reached the base, that man said nothing, took no praise, simply veered away and disappeared. Each year on a quiet day, her father would place an incense stick beside an old compass, the only item he had kept from that night. Elise reopened the Arrowpoint file. Formerly it sat in the list of gray operations, unclassified as to nature, unacknowledged. Now under her hands it began to reanimate. Scattered report lines, fragments of old maps, disjointed names, all gradually pieced together. A clear pattern emerged. Mark Delgado was the center, yet had never been officially recorded. The press began to sense something unusual. Investigative columns expanded. The name, the man with the broken arrow tattoo, appeared on the front pages of 3 major papers. A veteran journalist from the New York Times traveled to San Antonio carrying a recorder and an offer of an exclusive interview. But Mark refused. He did not open the door, did not take calls. The handwritten letters sent to him were arranged neatly in a tin box. He read them all, then stored them away. One night, when a news segment about him aired during the evening broadcast, Mark stood up. He watched his image filmed from behind, the light shining on frayed shoulders. A newscaster spoke of historic silence and an unrecognized figure in modern war. Mark took the remote, switched off the screen, then stood still in the dark. He did not feel proud, only empty, as though every time his name was spoken, it was another reminder of those who were gone. "It's not for me," he said softly, "alone. It's for the ones who never came back." The tattoo on his arm was still there, like a wordless oath, not to stand out, but to not forget. 1 year after the job fair fell into that uncanny silence because of a Marine's formal salute, the Department of Defense sent an official letter to Mark's address. In the thick envelope were a summons order, the signature of the head of the armed forces, and a formal invitation to present, at last, the Medal of Honor for the action of leading the team through the encirclement in Kandahar, 2010. This time, every document was clear. Operation Arrowpoint had had its file restored. The survivors had signed their attestations. The public knew the story. Every procedure was in order, but Mark did not come. Instead, on the very day of the medal ceremony, a small parcel was delivered directly to the event coordinating officer. A brown wooden box, no sender's address, only a small carving on the underside. A broken arrow. Inside was a piece of polished steel. Not new steel, but a section cut from a ruined gun barrel, kept, ground smooth, and hand-engraved with Mark's tattoo. The arrow and the line Kandahar 2010. Alongside it, a slip of paper folded in four. Black ink, slanted script, slightly trembling yet still clear. "Do not raise a monument for me." Etch their names, the 9 still lying beneath the sand. I was only the one who carried the compass. No signature, no date. The event coordinator held the note, silent for a long while. Then he folded it again, placed it back into the wooden box. In the hall where the ceremony was supposed to occur, there was no speech, no medal pinned, only a single message broadcast. Silence at times is the most sacred form of loyalty. A month later, the San Antonio Job Fair Center, the place where it all began, quietly hung a new plaque at the main entrance. The piece of steel from the parcel was mounted in a glass frame. No caption, no backlight. Below it there was only a single small line engraved in recess, a broken arrow guiding the lost. They held no inauguration, no banners, no press. But each year on the Day of Remembrance, the veterans who had come to the fair that year all find their way back. They stop before the glass frame. No one says anything. They simply stand and look in silence. Some place a hand on the steel. Some give a very slight nod, a nod to something larger than the past, a promise to keep such stories from slipping into oblivion. No one knows where Mark went afterward. He left San Antonio quietly, leaving no address. Someone who once worked with him at the parking lot said he mentioned Montana, a place with pine forests quiet enough to hear old footsteps again. Another said he returned to New Mexico, where his mother had once lived, but no one is certain, and perhaps that no longer matters, because the name Mark Delgado, once absent from any medal roster, now exists not thanks to a presentation ceremony, but because of that very refusal. He did not want a monument. He wanted memory, not of himself, but of those he could not bring back. Each year, thousands of people pass by the plaque at the fair, veterans, newly separated service members, and those who have never set foot on a battlefield. They pass it as one might pass an unnamed milestone, but sometimes someone pauses longer. Someone takes out a phone and snaps a photo. Someone simply stands there, looks at the deep carved mark, and exhales a long breath. And that is enough. Legacy does not lie in being remembered, but in the fact that someone still walks on quietly, carrying the direction of an arrow that once broke, but never stopped. There are heroes who never appear on the news, never stand under stage lights, and never receive medals. They leave only a small trace, a tattoo, a marking, a sentence that is never spoken aloud. Yet it is precisely those quiet people who keep our compass needle from spinning astray in chaotic times. Mark Delgado's story reminds us that honor does not need applause. It resides in silent choices, in footsteps no one knows about that alter the course of someone else's fate. And sometimes recognition does not come from authorities, but from the eyes of someone who was once saved. If this story touched you, if you have ever known a broken arrow in your own life, leave a comment. Share this video with a veteran, a father, a friend. And don't forget to follow the channel so we can continue telling the stories that have never been told. Thank you for listening with all your heart.